New antibiotics for children, something we certainly want. Actually, for any drug that gets developed, we'd like to have a way to use it in children if children ever get that disease. So with antibiotics, we certainly want to have ways to use our newest antibiotics in our smallest colleagues. Unfortunately, and this is the heart of the newsletter that I'm talking about today, it's much more difficult to do that than you might imagine. And it's often the case that the pediatric formulation of a new antibiotic is delayed by years relative to the adult formulation. And there are a lot of subtleties in this problem that are discussed in the newsletter. If you get interested in this problem, please read the newsletter in detail, because I can't possibly go through all the elements that are in the newspaper, a lot of links, and a lot of this stuff you really have to spend a little time thinking about it. But I thought in this video we might look at some of the high-level ideas that are in the newsletter. So, brutal truth is that pediatric development, it's not just a few months after the adult, it's years later that we have a pediatric version of the drug for adults. And that's a double whammy for kids, because they might need the antibiotic right now. And some years later, when it finally gets developed for kids, it could be the resistance is developed such that you can no longer still use the antibiotic. So it's really the case that we'd like to bring the pediatric development in as close to the adult development as possible. Well, you can say that, but it's harder than you might think to do that. One example of the problem is just making a smaller unit dose for children. If it's something you're going to give IV, you can probably scale it down and just give a portion of an IV dose. But tablets, which is the thing that we most often want, something oral, that's what you can use as an outpatient. It's actually harder to take a pill this size and make it that size than you would expect. It's a whole different manufacturing process, and the stability of the compound might change when you go from this size to that size. It's not trivial to shrink it up, and so that's one of the challenges to deal with. It could also be that the pharmacology is a little different in children. Children's organs are still developing over time. The function of your kidney when you're 3 months old is different from the function of your kidney when you're 30 years old. So all of that matters. You may need a different dose. So working all that out in children is tricky. And it's complicated by the fact, in part, that children don't get these serious infections as often as adults, so the number of kids that are available to study is smaller. And we also, I think, quite naturally are very protective of children. We don't want to put them in a clinical trial if we can avoid doing that. I've been in the position of asking Dr. Mom to allow me to work with her child in a clinical study, and everybody's very, appropriately very protective of kids. We really don't want to do it unless you really need to. Taken together makes it just harder to do and take longer than you might imagine. I mean, there are some creative ideas that have started to emerge. One of the most obvious ones is that in most adult trials, we cut it off at age 18. Now, the day you turn 18, suddenly you're an adult and you can be in my trial. But when you're 17, you can't be in my trial. Well, that may make sense at the very start, but as you go along a little further, it can often make sense to say, well, you know what, really, kids from age 12 to 17 are pretty close to being adults. Their organs work basically like adult organs work. There's no reason why a 15-year-old can't be in this study. It's at a certain point along the way. You got some information in adults. Let's actually open up, go down to age 12. And that at least gets part of it done. That's a third of the way down to age 0. Not all the way, but it's better than nothing. So it's that kind of creative thinking that we're hoping to see used to accelerate, reel in that pediatric development timeline to something less than many, many years. Well, anyway, that's a quick tour of the challenges. Not as simple as you might think to fix the problem. Please go look at the newsletter. Just lots and lots of particular interlinked examples about how the different regulatory agencies think about this, and some of their differences in thinking is very instructive as well. Why would you worry about this versus that? A lot of good stuff in there. So anyway, drugs for children, we'd all like to have them. Wish we could have them right away. It's not as easy as you might think.